Yeah, thank you, Rachel, and to the MIC for bringing us together for this session. And Rachel's already introduced us, so I think we'll just dive straight in. We've got a presentation for you. I'm co-hosting this with Roz and John, who are our lovely panel members at the MIC's Insight Advisory Group. And yeah, thank you to them for contributing today and offering their insights. The aim of this session is to introduce you to the importance of patient and public involvement and engagement, to kind of demystify what it is and what it isn't, specifically from our view working here in Newcastle, and to give you some ideas of how you might be able to apply patient and public involvement in your research to benefit your research. The objectives are for you to understand what we mean by patient in public involvement engagement. The terms are used in different ways by different funders, but generally the gist of it's always been the same. So we're going to explain it from a NIHR point of view. The second objective is to understand why patient and public involvement is important in research, and to explain to you some of the benefits from our own experience, how we see it benefiting research in our area. And the third bit is to develop your knowledge on patient public involvement engagement in research, and how some ideas of how you might be able to apply it. And we're really hoping it'll be quite a short, hopefully this is quite a short presentation, then we'll get into some discussion where if people have got questions, we might be able to answer them. So what is patient public involvement and engagement, commonly referred to as PPIE? Well, we use the National Institute of Health Research definitions, which I think are really simple and help you to kind of as quickly as possible understand what is meant by those. So from involvement, their NIHR definition is where members of the public are actively involved in research projects and in research organisations. Now, later on in this presentation, we're going to give some real kind of examples of where people can be involved in your research. I don't want to dwell on this too much, but actively involved is really the emphasis in that definition. So patients or public are helping you to either decide help you shape your research question, or on one end, or actually helping you deliver your research as well, which happens in more and more cases now. When we talk about engagement, that's mainly where information and knowledge about research is provided or disseminated to a wider audience. And specifically when we talk about patient and public involvement engagement, engagement means telling members of the public or specific patient groups about your research, what you did, what you learned, what the impact of your research is likely to be. And engagement, as we're going to talk about later, also includes feeding back to people that have been involved in your research, whether they've been involved in your research team, or you've consulted with them at some point, or perhaps your participants as well, making sure that they have the option to hear back how their participation has resulted in the findings of your research. I've worked in patient and public involvement engagement for probably about 10 years on and off. And quite a few years ago, there was another P, and it was for participation. And it's got slightly forgotten. Well, it's not forgotten, but it's perhaps not had as much emphasis on it, because we're striving more and more to involve people and not just have them be kind of bunnies, as we kind of colloquially say in your research. But spare a thought for participation too, because I think if you get involvement right at the start, it can really make a difference to if your research involves participants. It can make a real impact on in the success of recruiting participants. There is a fantastic new set of standards for public involvement that have been agreed last year. All the nations in the UK have signed up to this, and the NIHR is one of the founding members of this set of public standards. We're going to be sending you the link to these after the meeting. But just to kind of, they are a really nice set of standards to think about. How to evaluate the quality of your public involvement in your research. So the first one being there, the standard one, inclusive opportunities. And, you know, that's something I ask a lot of my colleagues and research colleagues at the minute, is how have they made sure that the research they're doing is inclusive and accessible to the widest group of people. And the other one, just a bit kind of, we're going to look at again quite a lot in this, in the subsequent slides, is communication, standard 4, which says we'll use plain language for timely two-way and targeted communication. That kind of two-way dialogue with people, patients or public, is so important in patient and public involvement. I think that's a really important thing, because in the past it's often kind of research has been going, finding out what people think, and then kind of moving on. And that, you know, at the minute now we're thinking about how we can involve people all the way and it not just be a one-way conversation. A quick note on what PPI is not. So we, in my role as the patient and public lead for the MIC and the BRC and the CRF here, I often get kind of approached saying, I'm going to send out this, I want to find out people's opinion, please can you send out this questionnaire to people? And a questionnaire and asking for people's thoughts isn't necessarily patient and public involvement. If you wanted to ask patients what they thought about your questions you're going to ask in a survey and help them, get them to help you shape what you're actually going to ask, that would be involvement. But just gathering their views, sending out a survey is not. It's also an example where sending out a survey and you asking a load of questions and trying to gather experience, it's quite one-sided. It's not a two-way conversation. You can't get that kind of the interesting anecdotes you would in a conversation from a survey. So a survey is, that's one of the examples where we wouldn't necessarily class that wouldn't tick your box of involvement just by kind of sending out a survey to gather experiences. It has to really involve people right at the start of thinking about what you want to ask. So yeah, the next bit, if we've kind of explained roughly what involvement engagement is, the next bit is why bother at all? You know, it's in for, you know, for some people it feels like a daunting experience. For others, you don't know where to start, and we just want to spend a little bit of time explaining to you why we think it's really important to involve patients and public. So John, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm John Bedlington and I'm the chair of a charity called Liver North. It's a healthcare charity and we've been going for 25 years supporting liver patients. It's a national charity. I'm also a hospital governor and have been for 10 years, and prior to that I was a fire officer for 32 years. So I've been in public service quite a long time. So we meet the national standards as a charity. The 5 standards, and the first one, the inclusive one, it's our aim in a nutshell is to we have a research register of people who can turn up if someone is asking for for patient and public involvement. We can provide patients who for disease specific research, or we can provide members of the public or carers. And but what I'd like to say at the very start is, and it's what Kasia mentioned really, the researchers need to start right at the very beginning, including their public, to speak to them and find out if they're asking the right question. If the public are on board for that, if your participants are on board for that, you're going to get a lot more cooperation. The next standard about matching all contributions, unless you're the principal investigator or one of the other investigators, you are a patient, a carer, clinician, any of the other things. So you have quite a wide remit. The PP covers everybody else. So just remember that there are lots of sources to get support from, not just your hospital patient group. For support and learning, we have don't expect our participants, and I'm using the term participants by the way, and I would urge you not to use the term subjects because people hate being referred to as a subject. But your participants or your co-partners in the research never go in cold, and we don't. It's not a matter of training them. It's a matter of helping them to understand that objectivity is important. They'll get their point across much better if they are objective. To not have any personal agenda, because people generally will ignore personal agenda. They listen to it politely, but they'll generally ignore it. It's got to be the wider scope before they go in. And the other thing is that we will support them with counselling if they need it. For communication, it's a bit back to support and learning. Plain English and lay language is very important both ways. Please don't expect anyone to understand NHS acronyms. It's a bit like the law. It's a bit like when I was in the fire service. We have our own series of acronyms so that other people don't know what you're talking about, basically. So we've got to avoid them, and we do have an acronym guide. It's got about 10,000 words in it, believe it or not. The impact of what you're doing is so important. The feedback to your participants is vitally important. It's about the people who've participated, as well as the research and as well as your investigators. Keep them informed, keep them in the loop all the time, because that's the only reward they'll get. And it's so important. Also, if there are any improvements brought about because of your research, letting them know that they've contributed to it is very worthwhile and pure gold for someone who's given their time and voluntary time, in fact, to help you. And governance, we consider that, of course, to be, you have to remember that everything you're doing is for and on behalf of the public, and it's worth keeping that high on your priorities, because we all are contributing to the public good. So that's about it, Kasia. Is it next slide?
Yeah, this is the next slide. This is your second slide, John.
Okay, so we've been providing funding. We're also funders, I forgot to say that. And we have a team of medical advisors and also a team of lay advisors. We receive an application and we send it first of all to our team of medical advisors. We also, on the team are clinicians, surgeons, scientists, and a pastoral person who is either a psychologist or a chaplain. If there's a majority of the medical advisory team are in favour, it comes back to our lay team, which are the governors of the charity, and we look at whether or not we think the funding will benefit the public and whether or not we can afford it. As I said earlier, we have a research register, and we keep that up to date, and we always ask people if they'd like to join the research register. We do make the point that generally people who are on a research program as a participant can do better than people who are not, but that isn't the reward we're offering. We're just saying that that's one of the things that can happen. It's because you're being monitored more frequently, your conditions is examined more frequently, and that's from a disease specific point of view. There are other researchers where being a participant, other research projects where being a participant is no help whatsoever. When I said that the reward is to get updated by the investigator, we do that as part of our education meetings, and every 6 weeks we have a briefing from a consultant who generally has participated in some of the research, and we also put them on YouTube so that our 2,500 members can watch them without coming to the meeting. The condition of our funding is that the lead investigator attends to give us a talk and to update us and to answer any questions from people, a lot of whom it attracts people who have participated in the research, who will turn up to listen to the presentation and ask questions about what happened to their piece of involvement. And the last thing is, and Kasia mentioned it about surveys, seminars and questionnaires, it is a one-way system, that one really, but there is a lot of value to be had from involving the patients in the design of the questionnaire. And some of the questionnaires we get from that haven't involved patients You can tell straight away that it hasn't involved patients because they're asking all the wrong questions. Sorry if that seems a bit trite, but it is important to involve patients in your questionnaire design and surveys. So next slide, Kasia.
Yep, that's over to me. Thank you for that, John. Just a note to say that Live and North have been absolutely fantastic supporters of the MIC and the BRC and the CRF over many years. And actually, just last week, I'm working with a group of researchers here for a big multi-partner MRC bid, Medical Research Council bid, and it's around multiple long-term conditions. So John and his lovely partner Joan sent out the invite to come and get involved in some PPIE sessions that we're hosting, because we thought that some of the peers within Live and North would have multiple long-term health conditions, and we received, I think, about 5 to 10 responses, which was fantastic. And we've got quite a short deadline as well for people to get back to us. So thank you, John. And wanting to inundate you with other people contacting you, Live and North are a fantastic supporter of patient-public involvement, if it's relevant to those listening. So a quick one from me: why bother with patient-public involvement engagement? We have a local group, research support group here called PIMS, which is supported by Helen Hansen at Newcastle University and the NUF, Newcastle Hospital Trust here. And they have a great group. Here's a picture of some of the members of that group. They had a research study that was going to be presented to that group. And the researchers were going to be asking, as part of that research, they were going to be asking for 3 things from participants: a blood sample, a small tissue sample, and a feces sample. And they went to this group quite nervous about what this patient group might say about the research asking for a tissue sample. And it was kind of really concerned that whatever this patient group might say is it going to be a problem asking for these samples? Actually, what they found when they went to speak to this group was the group were quite fine with a small tissue sample being taken, but they didn't want to take their poo in a pot to any sort of meeting. It was very embarrassing. So actually what they decided to do was to make the feces sample an option, and to change the way they went about asking for that, which we believe will have made a difference to people being willing to participate in the research. And the example, giving you that example is, we can often be quite eaten up as researchers and professionals thinking one thing that the public or patients might feel about the research, and actually it ends up being something completely different. So I'm always surprised by the conversations I have with patients and public, that often what I think ends up being changed from talking to them. So over to Ros now, you've kind of had a patient charity perspective from John, and here's Ros to give a different perspective from a patient and public involvement.
Good morning, I'm Ros Wilson, and I'm a member of Voice, which is the PPI part of the National Innovation Centre for Ageing, situated here at Newcastle University. I've been a Voice member for about 6 years and contribute to many of the research activities. At present, apart from being involved with the MIC group, I've been a member of the research support group for 6 years, where with others, I help construct lay summaries for researchers and review and support their projects. I have a similar role as a member of the Newcastle Biobank Applications Committee, and I'm a facilitator for a joint study being carried out by Newcastle, East Anglia and Birmingham universities for Alzheimer's research. And I'm also a member of the NIHR Multimorbidity, Ageing and Frailty Theme Coordinating Group. And I've been involved and I've participated in many diverse projects. And most people in Voice do this, and it gives such a wide perspective, working with design and businesses, banking, all sorts of things. So why is it important in research? I mean, in the past, there has been a gap in understanding between the scientific community and public perspective. On one hand, scientists are focused on their research and sometimes excluded the public by using technical language. On the other hand, sometimes the public have unjustly thought scientists were rather strange people in white coats doing experiments in laboratories using jargon which they just didn't understand. So PPI groups want to bridge that gap and improve understanding, confidence and trust between the two sides, so that those of you in the scientific world benefit from our experience and insight, and the public understands that research can be taken for and by them and not only done to them. Those of us who are involved in Voice PPI are interested in scientific research. We know that generally we will not benefit from research ourselves, but we want to leave a better world for our children and our grandchildren's generations. We give you our time and experience. In exchange, you stimulate and engage our minds. Voice provides public insights that we hope informs priorities, develops deep understanding of consumer needs and impacts product and service development. At the Voice Research Support Group, we review lay summaries for you to ensure technical jargon is removed and simple language structures are used, and hopefully we constructively add a different perspective to your projects. We also treat your proposals with complete confidentiality, so I will only use examples today that are already in the public domain. Our questions to researchers are based on the simplicity of why, what, who, when, where and how. We encourage all researchers to be succinct. If you can explain your proposal in a single page, it shows you yourself understand your own project. And this will go down. This will go down well for you if you're applying for funding. But what of the future? Has the world of scientific research been turned upside down recently? Could it be that in need to find answers to the coronavirus pandemic, we might proceed without necessary caution? One of the most fascinating projects I'm involved with is using artificial intelligence. This is the COVID-19 symptom study run by Dr. Tim Spector, King's College London, which is the largest public science project of its kind anywhere in the world. Almost 4 million people are participating by reporting their health daily to an app, which combines these reports with software algorithms and seeks to predict who has the virus and how it is spreading. If this evolving data using AI can predict this as accurately as a swab or other type of testing, then does it change the whole process of infection diagnostics and control? Apart from the mass participation of this study, the research team invites involvement of the public by answering questions from the participants on a weekly webinar. And on its website, the team produce their analysis daily for the public to engage with. However, if this is the direction of future diagnostics, what is the impact on the public? A huge amount of data will be compiled. The race is on during this coronavirus pandemic to produce a tracking device. But if apps on our mobile phones can track not only people who we are in contact with, but also those who are in close proximity, what then? Apart from issues of privacy and data protection, could such amassed information be used against us in the future? For anyone who has read George Orwell's 1984, this is scary. And for those who have not, I highly recommend it. The advancement of AI is yet another reason for the public to be involved in the development of research, to question and highlight the risks as well as the benefits of scientific projects. So let us make sure that between us, scientists and PPI volunteers, we build a better world for the future.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Ros. And for those that are based in the Newcastle area on the call, we will be sending out the links to Voice. Being local in Newcastle or kind of the northeast isn't necessarily a pre-requirement to get involved in Voice and use the platform, but we'll send you the details of our colleagues to talk to there. But it's a great it's a great opportunity to talk to patients and public. And there are also other universities that are linked up with Voice. So Imperial College London, they are actively using the Voice platform to engage people, and so is Leeds, I believe, at the minute. So anyone who is based in those areas, there are links to be made. So we've talked a little bit about what involvement is and what engagement is. We've talked a little bit about what it isn't, and we've given you some arguments to suggest that we believe it's really important to always involve patients and public in your research. But how can you actually involve people in your research, and how can you do engagement? This is a really simple slide, a diagram of that splits out the different stages of research, and what I'm going to do now is go through very briefly some examples in each of those stages where you can involve people or patients. And we are working on a planning tool here locally where we take those different stages, and we're creating a tool where you can actually start to plan what you're going to do. And I was really hoping it would be ready to share with you all as a tool to take away at this webinar. It's not quite ready yet. We're still doing a bit of testing to it, but keep in touch if you'd like to access that in the next couple of months for your own research. So at the top of that of the diagram is identifying and prioritizing. So in there, we're really kind of questioning to you, could you involve a local patient-public involvement group in helping you identify or hone your research question right at the start of your research journey? Voice is a platform, you could, a group that you go to kind of have that conversation. Liver North, if it was relevant. There are lots of other local patient groups or public groups you could go to. But also at this stage, the work may have already been a little bit done for you. So an example would be the James Lind Alliance, where there's been a number of kind of partnerships between researchers and the public and charities that have come together and decided sets of research questions on health agendas that they feel jointly are very important to look at. So multiple long-term health conditions is one of them. So there's information to, so we're going to put in the James Lind Alliance link to that when Rachel sends you through the link. So not saying that you always need to go and talk to people. Actually, sometimes the conversations have already been had and you can find that evidence somewhere. Research design. This is so important to talk to some people, patients, and ideally patients or the participants that you might want to engage in your research, to talk through what the methods are that you're going to use. Are they are they definitely appropriate for the participants? So going back to my example, actually collecting a feces sample wasn't maybe as appropriate as it was tissue. They weren't as comfortable with it. And could they help advise on your recruitment strategy? Or help you define what your outcomes are going to be from your research. In particular, with the recruitment strategy, it can make a real difference to getting some participants and having a successful recruitment strategy if you've talked to people and actually you've got some champions out there who can share the opportunity with their peers as well. Because word of mouth, we know, is one of the best ways to advertise in any activity you're doing. Developing your research proposal to make your, to do your grant proposal, and that's going to go to the decision makers. Could you involve people in your lay summary, making sure it's being checked? Like Ros has said, they often at Voice, they often are looking at lay summaries and helping to make them as good as can be. Or could you actually name someone as a co-applicant if you get a good working relationship with a patient or public rep? Would they be willing to come on board and support your grant proposal? Manage it, and then kind of moving on from that in terms of being a co-applicant, managing and supporting the delivery of research. Now this gets into co-production, and I absolutely wish we had more time to go into discussing co-production. It might be a session that we put on after this, because it's becoming very vogue now to really push forward and try and involve people in the delivery of your research. So have you thought about how people can play a role in your research team? That might be in assisting interviews or helping to analyse and interpret findings. There's a fantastic lady who's based in Newcastle and York called Rachel Stocker, who achieved that very, very successfully in a public health research project that she did involving patients as actual members of the team, helping to interpret the information that was coming out of that qualitative research project. Dissemination, engagement and feedback. Feedback, as John has said in particular, is the #1 complaint of most patients and public. People are giving up their time to either participate in your research or to help in the involvement stages and giving their opinion. But often we forget to go back to them and let them know what were the findings or how the research is going. Patients and public don't always want to know that you've found some amazing thing from your research and it's going to make a massive difference to this patient group. They actually, even if it hasn't, you know, it's just, it's ruled out something, or it hasn't actually gone wrong, it hasn't gone the way you wanted it and you've come up with some other findings, that's okay as well. They just want to know what the final outcome was for their involvement. Engagement is another, once again, another whole hour or 2 hour or half day a day sessions you could do around engagement. But if you've involved people in thinking through the research design, you may have also included thinking through how are you going to communicate the findings of your research. There's lots of local initiatives. Obviously, COVID times have kind of put a bit of a kibosh on some of that at the minute. So there's some local initiatives like Soapbox Science, where people are talking about their research in the summer at Monument, or there's Pint of Science as well, going into pubs to talk about your research. But even during COVID times, we are doing more and more virtually as PPI leads. So in Newcastle University, we are hosting virtual coffee mornings with patients and public, which are routinely attended by 50 to 100 members of the public wanting to hear about different topics or different research projects. So we did one on we've had one on nutrition, where some researchers who've been working on nutrition have come and talked about their findings of their research, and one on the Milkman study at the BRC as well. We came to talk about exercise and actually how the information and the findings of that research around exercise and milk and nutrition can be interpreted and learned from for COVID time. So we talked about exercise during lockdown and how you could, as an older population, for instance, you could exercise. So there are lots of ways of engagement, and I suppose I'm here to say COVID does not mean that we don't do engagement. It doesn't always have to be face-to-face, and more is being done virtually around that. Implementation and impact. This is, I suppose, linked to why have you done your research? What difference has it made? And what do you want to do with your research findings? So if you've got some evidence from your research, which could inform practice, service delivery, then if you've involved public contributors in the work, they might have some sway to be able to get your research findings implemented. As an example, it might be, say, Liver North, who are very well collected into the trust and stuff. They might have contacts for you to have a conversation with decision makers, managers within health trusts. Or it might be that you want to have one of your patient or public reps come along to an event and speak with you to show as an advocate for the importance of your research findings and how it might make a difference to health service delivery. And the last thing there, monitoring and evaluation. I suppose this goes a little bit back to the managing and supporting the delivery of your research, but can involving patients and public in the monitoring and evaluation of your research offer a different perspective or on the outcomes that that maybe you hadn't foreseen, and they might be able to support the evaluation and also just kind of give you a bit of a boost, you know, to know that your research has really made a difference. I should note as well, just before so we're working on a tool where researchers can use to sort of brainstorm some ideas around all these different layers that you can involve people in your research. And in the Northeastern Cumbria, I'm working with the Research Design Service and a group called Creating Connections to create 1 hour webinars on each of these individual areas to kind of give researchers much more a bit of dedicated time to think through how you can do these different layers of PPIE in your research. So moving on to the last part of our presentation, we want to give you some best practices and lessons learned from the perspective of patients and public contributors, namely John and Ross on this call. So Ros, I've mentioned the James Lind Alliance, but Ros can give you a perspective of a member of the public being involved in one of these activities.
Thank you. Yes, this James Lind Alliance was a priority setting partnership, a PSP. So PSPs enable clinicians, patients and carers to work together to identify and prioritise evidence uncertainties in areas of health and care that could be answered by research. I was privileged to be involved with this research study. It exemplified how well committed people who have insight, expertise and experience can work so well together and produce a good result. Across the globe, for most nations, regardless of the geographic location or developmental stage, the 80+ age group is growing faster than any other. Whilst this increased longevity is a great success, it is also accompanied by an increase in number of people living with multiple health conditions. Healthcare delivery was built and generally remains centred on the treatment of single diseases, and so researchers have therefore focused on single diseases. This PSP aimed to draw attention and provide direction to this under-researched area by working together with older people, carers and health professionals on a collaborative approach, giving equal attention to each. Firstly, several specialists created a survey which would be available to participants online by post or one-to-one interview. It covered questions of a variety of aspects of general health and how these affected their own health and well-being. Having set this out, they brought the survey to the Voice Research Support Group that I mentioned earlier to evaluate from a public and patient perspective. Firstly, we questioned the title of the survey. The title on the document was Multimorbidity in the over 80 population. That is a correct medical term, but you can be kinder to that age group of prospective participants. After a great deal of thought, we recommended changing the title to Multiple Conditions in Later Life, which was accepted. We then went through the document with a fine-tooth comb until we reached a final draft, which was easy to read, understand, and answer. A steering group was then set up and consisted of 15 specialists, 4 members of the public, 1 charity, 3 data specialists, and 1 independent chair from the James Lind Alliance. The timescale was agreed for the completion of each part of the study from the beginning all the way through to the results being published in medical journals and the press, and this was adhered to. 359 people aged 80+ living with 3 or more conditions, carers and health and social care providers completed the survey. The data was then sorted, merged and summarised, then checked against existing research evidence into 236 questions by a non-clinical researcher and a PPI subcommittee of the steering group. A second survey was then sent out to another group of interested parties who had a personal experience or professional interest and invited them to pick their top 10. This produced a long list of 97. Further analysis reduced this to a short list of 21 questions. So, a mix of people aged 80+ living with 3 or more health conditions, carers and health and social care providers then took part in a 1-day workshop to review and rank the 21 shortlisted questions. It did take all day to thrash out the top 10 priorities, and it was a pleasure to witness the older members of the workshop being given the opportunity to voice their concerns and provide such rich conversation throughout the day. By the end of the day, we had an agreed top 10 priorities for research into multiple conditions in later life. So the results were published and reports were given at conferences and in the press, but the study did not end there. The team at Voice, with help from the PPI members of the steering group, put on an event at Sage Gateshead called Aging Matters to deliver the results to the public and invited all who had taken part in the study, plus local politicians and interest groups, Voice members and members of the public. After revealing the results of the study on stage, questions were invited and answered by the leading specialists. After everyone had enjoyed a delicious lunch, they were encouraged to browse the information on stands put up by research organisations and charities, inviting those attending to become involved in future studies. So for me, this is a model of good practice which shows how participation, involvement and engagement can be achieved for and with the public and patients articulating their own problems. This will and should lead to more focused research being taken in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Ros. And John, your example from the North?
Yes, indeed. There I'm back. There's a couple of instances I would like to talk about. The first one, it isn't on this slide, but it's something that was patient-led. Well, patient and clinician-led, really. It was a partnership. And it was just a simple example of how the patient pressure can help so many people, including clinicians. There is a disease called primary biliary cholangitis. And until about 3 years ago, it was called primary biliary cirrhosis. Cirrhosis is an end-stage liver disease. There's a stigma attached to anyone who has liver cirrhosis, and the word was just totally wrong. Somehow this disease had been named inappropriately, and there was a bit of pressure, and at the British Association for the Study of the Liver, it was a joint decision from patients and clinicians to change the name of it. So there's not often the name of the disease is changed. This one was to make it more appropriate and also to remove the stigma. And patients were extremely grateful for that. But that was just a quick example of where patient participation was really useful. The clinicians would have carried on forever calling it cirrhosis. It was just another name for a disease. So the example I'm going to give you now is a one about fatigue. Fatigue in liver patients. Most liver patients, if not all, suffer from chronic fatigue. And with patient pressure, we asked clinicians to look at this, and two quite eminent professors, Julia Newton, who was the professor of aging and vitality at at Newcastle hospitals, and Professor David Jones, who's head of the medical school, who's also an expert on primary biliary cirrhosis, got together and had a look at it. They interviewed lots of people, and over a period of about 18 months, they came up with a leaflet for us called Fatigue in Liver Patients, and this is it. It's one of our 24 leaflets which appear in the notice boards, and they're all available on our website and from ISU, our publishing partner. Anyway, the leaflet basically could find no cure for chronic fatigue and no cause apart from liver disease, but really it was the patient experience that was very important. And what the outcome of the leaflet was a simple statement, the clinician's perspective, and these words were gold for the patient. I'll read it out to you. This is their reward, this paragraph. And this is what they said, these two professors. Fatigue is a common and debilitating symptom in chronic inflammatory disease. It can affect all age groups and can impact enormously on quality of life. One of the problems frequently faced by patients who experience fatigue is a sense of disbelief by friends, family, and even healthcare professionals as to the nature and origin of the symptoms that affect them so dramatically. This sense of lack of belief in those around them can contribute to social isolation. And that's a simple statement written by these two researchers that the patients who have no cure for this condition hang on to and treat like gold. And we have many people say, thank God for the leaflet. And it isn't a cure, it isn't a therapy, it's just an explanation. So that's one example of how we've done this. Those patient stories are now published in the British Medical Journal, and they're entertaining reading of what the patients have been through. The brick walls they came up to, and one of the problems they came across many times was the doctors telling them to take some exercise. And the last thing they need to be told is to take exercise when they're chronically fatigued. They wake up feeling already needing to go back to bed. So anyway, that's my little story about one of the leaflets that we've produced. It's also on TEDx if you want to look at it. Tilly Hale's story, it's called, and it's the participants loved taking part and thought it was very rewarding. And it's solely because we produced a leaflet and the two investigators were very satisfied with the assistance they had. So that's it, Kasia.
Great, thank you, John. I think that's a really nice example of where, you know, relationships can become more than just being involved. It can really help to benefit everyone involved, and particularly, most importantly, the patients' lives as well and their well-being. So that's a great example, John. Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're 10 minutes and we've got to the end, so it's now question and discussion. Rachel, I'm sharing my screen, so I can't see if there's been any questions during it, but if you're all right, if anyone's got any questions, Ro?
Yeah, from Taryn. Yeah, I'll put that on. Taryn. Yeah, the leaflet is called Fatigue in Liver Patients, and it's number 18 on our series. If you go on to ISSU Liver North, ISSUU.
We'll send a link, John. We'll send a link out to it. With
the link out to all of the leaflets, actually, because they all had patient participation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for that question, Taryn.
Great. Yeah, I think we can wait a few more minutes for any more questions to come through. Yeah, I suppose I was wondering about if any of you have any thoughts about how you go about engaging with broader communities and diverse communities, because I suppose that's something that we're all a bit aware of at the moment. Yeah,
definitely. I'll start that one, if that's all right, John and Roz.
Yeah, of course.
It's one of the biggest challenges for patient public involvement, people like myself that are working in this. How do we, in particular during this time when we are very reliant on people having access to technology to be able to be involved? I think I was on a call with my national colleagues as well. It's something everyone is grappling with right at the minute. I think there are lots of different ways to talk to people, you know, there is the good old telephone as well, and phoning up some different local community groups. You know, do a Google, find out what type of people you want to talk to, and then find some community groups that might be willing to talk to you. Ring them up, ring the officers or the support people that are responsible for, really are gatekeepers to talking to a diverse range of people is really important. Also, I think for those that aren't based in Newcastle, find out whether you've got an equivalent me in your local area. So as I've just said, there's a national network of people like myself across pretty much every major city. So maybe talk to your university that you're linked to, whether you're a business, a company or not. Talk to the university you're linking into, find out if there's a patient or public person you might be able to contact. Also, the Research Design Service in North East and Cumbria are doing a fantastic amount of work in diversifying the kinds of people that are getting involved. So it might be worth linking in with your local Research Design Service as well.
Okay. We had a question from Emily. but can I go back to what you were just talking about before I answer Emily's, to Kasia? That it's important to realise that you know, and we found this out because we have a research register. It's important to realise that you don't have to have any particular qualifications to be to participate in research, because researchers do need carers. They need people who don't have a disease and don't have any involvement with the healthcare profession, or they don't know anyone who has a disease. Quite often they need people who are just to participate as a control, or as someone to provide a different point of view. So we're not just looking at patients, we're looking at the whole gambit of the public. Involve everyone you possibly can. And that widens it out much wider than looking at your patient group or your usual people who participate. So that's just what I wanted to say on that one. The best way to tackle topics with healthcare professionals, it's a good question. We're lucky because we have we're funders, so we have healthcare professionals who are basically depending on us. So they're all our friends, we like them, we get on well with them, and we have good relationships with the professionals. But we also send out our newsletter nationally and get quite a bit of response. We have 2,500 paper copies go out, and we have about 300 email copies. And we always get the odd bit of response from healthcare professionals who ask questions. And it's quite good to communicate. Whether or not you get an answer, it doesn't mean they're not reading it. And it doesn't mean they're ignoring it or they're putting it in the bin. So I don't know, that's what we do. I don't know how the best way for Emily to communicate with your health professionals.
John, if I can come in there, Emily, in terms of your comment there, without knowing all the background, if you've not already heard about Health Watch, every single area has a Health Watch. They are specifically tasked with service delivery and the quality of healthcare across and health and social care. And actually there's patient groups there that we are talking to, although we're primarily focused on involving patients public into research. Also, to me, that kind of your question there speaks to me of kind of health service delivery and quality. So we'll put a link, I'll put a link, I'll do that now. I'll put something into about Health Watches.
Yeah, the thing I remember about,
sorry. I was just going to say, on the other side, you know, for funding, with something like the James Lind Alliance, if researchers choose to follow the topics, you know, that have come out at the top of the James Lind Alliance study, they will get funding. You know, because this is James Lind Alliance has a lot of influence, and they will get funding. And for instance, the top one that came out of that study is just so much still what people are looking for. And the number one topic was, how can current health, social care and voluntary sectors in the UK be optimised to more effectively meet the needs of older people living with multiple conditions? There's still so much research to be done in that, and particularly at this time. It's very much highlighted in the news in the past week, bringing people together. But the funding will probably be given if you are doing your research within these James Lind Alliance topics.
Okay. Sorry. Can I reply to Emily again? Actually, I've just reread your question, Emily, and it sounds as if you're talking about a specific problem with your GP. Yeah. And one of the things we do when I said we don't train people, we help them to become patient participation representatives to be, you know, to know the right way to do it, to get their words across. And you come across buzzwords all the time, and words such as safeguarding and protecting, you know, these are the words that people can use. And don't forget, your GP has a responsibility to look after you. And you can, you know, Health Watch is a good one. I was chair of Health Watch in County Durham. The little problem with it is they have to have a trend. They can't take up individual cases. But if there's 2 or more people have a particular problem, then it becomes a Health Watch problem. And that's just to stop people going to them all the time with their individual problems, I suppose.
Yeah. But they'd be able to advise how to also
Yes.
back to you how to tackle individual.
Yes, they can. That's right.
Grand.